Hello and welcome to Daily News Simplified, where we take up the articles from the Hindu and discuss them as per the demands of Civil Services Examination. The topics of the discussion are listed on your screen. Now moving to the first article of the day, it is basically a case study and has appeared on the page number 2 of the Hindu. Now the article talks about the Lieutenant Governor V.K. Saxena giving sanction to prosecute Omkareshwar Thakur, who is the main accused in the Sulli deals case. Under this case, Muslim women were auctioned. Thakur, who was a bachelor's in computer applications from Indore, had allegedly created Sulli Deals app and Sulli Deals Twitter handle with the aim of insulting Muslim women as well as the community. Neeraj Bishnoi is believed to be creator and alleged mastermind of the Bully Buy application, which also allegedly auctioned Muslim women online. Now, this case highlights also a grave part of injustice, as the FIR against the Thakur was registered on 7th of July 2021, while the arrest happened in January 2022. Now, UPSC under the GS4 paper and specifically mentioned about the ethical issues, dilemmas and the case studies related to them. And from this case, we will try to analyze what are the different issues of ethics that are involved. The first ethical issue that this particular case highlights is the growing communalism. Now, in the recent past, we have seen a rise in the right-wing ideology around the world and also including India. This has led to increase in intolerance against the minority community in the society. And this can be reflected by various facts and incidences around the country. For example, compelling the minority people to chant Jai Shri Ram, the growing instances of cow vigilantism, and playing provocative songs in the front of mosques, and also up to some extent ostracization of minority community at the hands of majority religion. And the recent in this can be the including auctioning of Muslim women through online portals of app. All these are reflective of the growing communalism in the society as a whole. The second ethical issue that this case study highlights is the partiality in the law implementation. Now the FIR was registered on the accused on July 2021, but the arrest was made in January 2022. That is a delay of more than 6 months, and the prosecution is still not started. This delay implicates that the law implementers are partial in their duty. So this highlights a case of partiality. And this is against the foundational values of the civil services or the given code of conduct, which they've subscribed to oath for. It is also a violation at the same time of the fundamental rights and the equal protection of laws as guaranteed under Article 14 of the Indian Constitution. Further, at the same time, this also violates the idea of social contract between the state and the people, as the state has failed to provide justice to the victim in right amount of time. The third ethical issue that this case highlights is the outraging of the modesty of women and basically highlights the larger patriarchal mindset that is still prevalent in the country. Today, women comprises half of the society, and for a prosperous and a democratic society, it is preconditioned to ensure equal treatment of women in every field. But this particular case highlights the patriarchal mindset. Now, patriarchy in India is deep-rooted and a harsh truth for the Indian society, where woman is still considered as a secondary citizen. Now, the children who are born in this patriarchal family are social conditioned to a level that make them barely respect any woman, not only from their families but also outside. And this imposes severe restrictions on women starting from the very beginning till the very end of their life. The third ethical issue that can be highlighted here is the misuse of technology that has been happening. Now, UPSC has previously also asked questions related to use of technology and use of knowledge without conscience. And this particular case also reflects the misuse of technology. Though technology has penetrated to an unprecedented level and one cannot imagine our life without it, but in this case, the same technology is being misused by the people for their narrow vested interest. like the development of a computer application wherein the techie has used his knowledge of tech to spread hatred against a particular community rather than using the same knowledge for empowerment of women. Thus, it not only highlights the misuse of technology in this case, but gives a broader picture of misuse of technology in other ways also. For example, the terrorist can use it, and the technology can also be used for other monetary gains, which we seen as a sign of cyber crimes. So, the technology misuse highlights the broader impact on the society. The last ethical issue that can be culminated from this case study is the depletion of virtues in the society. In this whole case, we can see that there is a lack of virtue in all the stakeholders. It is a case of misutilization of the skill. It is clear that graduate is the victim of somewhat brainwashing, and this shows lack of virtue of tolerance and indoctrination. It also at the same time highlights that the cherished concept of diversity is going for a toss, and at the same time it represents that at the part of the police duty is not done judiciously and lacks objectivity as well as partiality. Thus these were the broader case issues that can be mentioned from this case study and can be utilized to answer questions or frame as an example to the questions on the part 1 as well as the part 2 of the ethics paper 4. Moving on to the next article of the day that has appeared on page 1 of the Hindu, basically talks about the Indonesian Foreign Minister Retno Marsudi asking India and other countries to respect and follow the Asean Consensus on Myanmar. Now, this came into the news because of the backdrop of India's apparent deviance from the principles of ASEAN Consensus that were adopted. Now, UPSC under the GS2 syllabus provides for India and its neighborhood relations. So, this topic is important for India's relationship with that of Myanmar, and at the same time, it also talks about bilateral, regional, and global groupings and the agreements involving India or affecting India's interest, thus highlights India's relationship also with countries of ASEAN. And UPSC in the previous year, that is in 2016, has asked questions related to India's low East policy, which basically translates to India's relationship with ASEAN countries, and have also asked questions related to various other groupings like that of SAARC in 2016 itself. So this topic become important for us from the perspective of mains examination. Now the background of this comes with the military takeover of Myanmar democratically established government in the February 2021. After deposing the National Unity Government and jailing thousands of leaders including Aung San Suu Kyi. It was in response to this situation that the ASEAN leaders, during a meeting that was later held in the 2021 itself, decided to reach a consensus and a plan of action to restore democracy in Myanmar, and 5 major principles which later came to be known as the ASEAN Consensus were adopted. Now we'll try to understand what are the basic ASEAN Consensus principles. We'll also try to understand what is the apparent shift that is happening with regard to India. And at the same time, at last, we'll also try to understand what is the reason behind India's deviance from the ASEAN Consensus. Now, first, the 5 basic principles of ASEAN Consensus that were adopted was the immediate cessation of violence in Myanmar, and all the parties, that is the government, the military junta, should exercise utmost restraint. Secondly, it talks about constructive dialogue among all the parties that are concerned. That is a dialogue between the military junta and the democratically elected national unity government to seek a peaceful solution in the interest of the people. Further, under the consensus, a special envoy of the ASEAN chair was to appointed that shall facilitate mediation of the dialogue process with assistance from Secretary General of ASEAN. It was also agreed that ASEAN will provide humanitarian assistance to the Myanmar, and a special envoy would also be tasked with meeting members from all concerned parties there. So this brings us to the question that why there has been an apparent shift and what is the apparent shift. Indian Foreign Secretary made a visit to Myanmar but didn't meet with the member of deposed political parties, nor did official press release refer to the ASEAN Consensus. Meaning thereby, the Ministry of External Affairs statement had no mention of any Indian interest in seeing Myanmar return to the path of democracy or for the release of political prisoners and other tricky issues. So this was regarded as the first deviance from the ASEAN consensus, wherein the consensus has talked about participation from all the stakeholders. Secondly, ASEAN conveyed concerns on India about their invitation to Myanmar foreign minister for the BIMSTEC virtual summit, with no focus on bringing back democracy or re-establishing democracy in Myanmar, or talking little about the political prisoners. So this brings us to the question that why India is moving, or what are the reasons for deviance for India from the ASEAN consensus. Now the first major reason behind India's move is that of connectivity. Now Myanmar government support is important for India to expedite the completion of various projects that India is undertaking that are important not only for connectivity but also to ensure strategic development of the India's northeast region, facilitate trade and economic development, and to drowse the efforts of infiltration, which include the projects like Kaladan Multimodal Project and completion of projects like India Myanmar Thailand Highway or the IMT Highway, which is very important for India. And for the projects to be completed, India needs active participation from Myanmar and the people in charge in the power. And also in the case of India Myanmar Thailand Highway, there is a need for Myanmar's active participation to complete these projects. The second major reason that can be highlighted here is the issue of border management. Now, India and Myanmar today share a porous border and also follows the policy of free movement regime which allow the tribes to travel without visa up to 16 kilometers on the borders. As these borders are a source of illegal migration and also can destabilize India's northeast region through infiltration and by promoting militancy in this region, the cooperation with Myanmar army is important to check illegal migration as well infiltration of the insurgency groups in the northeast region. The third factor can be highlighted here is Myanmar's recent engagement with that of Pakistan. Now, there has been a budding relationship that is brewing between Pakistan and Myanmar, particularly after the military takeover in 2021. And this concerns the strategic interest of India in its neighborhood, as according to report, Pakistan has struck a deal with Myanmar to deliver lightweight, multi-role fighter jets. The fourth factor or the reason for India's shift that can be analyzed is the China factor. Now, historically also, China had a good relationship with Myanmar before the democracy was established in Myanmar and Aung San Suu Kyi came to power. China historically had better relationship with the military junta and was a key partner before the establishment of democracy. And again after the military coup that has happened in Myanmar, relationship between military junta and China is again budding as China has improved on its good relationship with military junta and is providing the much needed support for the Myanmar leadership in the face of international sanctions. Today, China is a key source of investment in the region and is funding various infrastructure projects like high speed railway lines and dams, etc. So, these are the reasons for India's apparent shift in its policy towards Myanmar. That is particularly important for the development of the India's northeast region, maintains its strategic autonomy in this region, and also at the same time ensure stability and security for the people of Northeast. Further, it is also important for India to ensure that its Act East policy is working smoothly in this region. So, with this, we have seen what was the ASEAN consensus that was derived, what is the apparent shift that has been noticed in India's engagement with that of Myanmar, and we have also analyzed what are the prominent reasons behind such a shift. Now, the consequences or the effect of which are later to be analyzed once India's engagement with Myanmar becomes more deeper. Moving on to the next article of the day that has featured in the Hindu on page number 9 basically talks about the end-to-end encryption and why are the major tech companies that are focusing on it, with primary that of Apple. Now, UPSC under the GS3 syllabus specifically mentioned the awareness in the field of IT, space and computers, and thus this area becomes important under the science section. And also UPSC under the GS3 mentions about the issue of cybersecurity, and thus this area is also important from the perspective of cybersecurity and forms an interlinkage with that of science section. Now, what has happened recently is that Apple has announced that it is going to increase the data points that are protected from end-to-end encryption from 14 to 23 categories. And the company has claimed that with the end-to-end encryption that will be provided, user data will be protected even in the case if the data is breached in the cloud. On the similar line, Elon Musk has earlier announced in the month of November that he too will make Twitter DMs end-to-end encrypted to ensure better privacy for the users. Now, the end-to-end encryption is not going well with the security agency, particularly with that of FBI, and it is deeply concerned with the threat of end-to-end encryption and the user-only access, as it will hinder its ability to protect the citizens from the issues of cyber attacks and that of terrorism or social issues like that of child pornography or violence against the children. Now, through this article, we'll try to understand what is end-to-end encryption, and also at the same time, we'll also try to understand why the companies are moving towards end-to-end encryption and what it will mean for the end users. So what is end-to-end encryption? Basically, end-to-end encryption is nothing but a communication process that will encrypt the data that is being shared between the two devices or between the two users. So what it does is that it will prevent third parties like the cloud service providers and the internet service providers or even that of cyber criminals from accessing data which is being transferred. And for this purpose, it uses an algorithm. We'll try to understand this from the perspective of an infographic. Now, through this infographic, we can see there is a user A and a user B. So when the data is not encrypted, the data usually is sent in the form of bits, that is 0 and 1. Suppose it has a message called hi. Now, when the data is sent over the public key, any hacker who has the access to the cloud can access this message and decode or decrypt this data as it is flowing through a public channel. Now, what end-to-end encryption does is that it uses an algorithm that will transform the standard text, that is hi, into an unreadable format. Now, this format can only be scrambled and read by those which are having the particular decryption keys, and this will be only available with those at the endpoints, that is with the user A, and user B will only have these decryption keys and not with any of the third parties or the cloud storage that is being utilized to share the data. And the encrypted message can only be decrypted if the particular key is found with the user B. So basically, it creates a unique key for both the users, and the data can only be encrypted or decrypted when both the users have the particular key. And this increases the privacy and data protection that is available with the users. Now, end-to-end encryption is not new. End-to-end encryption has been long used when transferring business document or financial details, and it can only be used to control users' authorization when accessing stored data, which seems what Apple is planning to do. At present, the end-to-end encryption is used to secure communication, and some of the popular instant messaging sites like WhatsApp, Signal, iMessage, and Google Messages works on this platform. End-to-end encryption is also used to secure passwords, protect stored data, and safeguard data on cloud storage from theft and that of attacks from hackers. So this brings us to the question that why are companies using it, or why there are companies moving towards end-to-end encryption. Now the Apple in the blog Rising Threat to Consumer Data in the Cloud stated that total number of data breaches have more than tripled between 2013 and 2021. And as data is the most important thing in the 21st century, now being termed as data as the new oil, the company shared that data of 1.1 billion personal records were exposed in 2021 alone, and that is trying to address this rising threat by implementing end-to-end encryption. As we have discussed in the beginning, Elon Musk is also trying to make the Twitter DMs end-to-end encrypted. The focus on the end-to-end encryption seems to stem from the companies or the mediums or the social media desire to position itself as a provider of secure data storage and transfer services. And Apple has been on a loggerheads with security agencies like FBI from the past, wherein it has been one of the most trusted company to ensure protection of data of its end users from snooping by the government agencies and making it a sought after feature by activists, journalists, and political opponents world over. So what it will mean for the end users is that the user data is protected from unwarranted parties, which may include the service providers, even the cloud storage providers, and companies that handle the encrypted data, and thus making the communication process more secure. Apple tries to do so by using the end-to-end encrypted data to be only decrypted by trusted devices which are users and assigned with Apple ID, and no one else can use this data, and it remains secure even in the case of data breach on the cloud storage. And this is the cause of concern for the security agencies like that of FBI, as they believe that end-to-end encryption will make their job difficult in countering the increasing cybercrime, can be used for propagating terrorism, and to ensure child safety. So with this, we have seen what is basically end-to-end encryption of data, why companies are moving forward, and what are the key issues that security agencies highlight by going through this end-to-end encryption. Moving on to the last article of the day, the article features on page 6 of the Hindu and basically talks about the China's stat or India's relationship with China, with focus on India's grand strategy for the containment and engagement with China at the same time. Now the article mentions about the concept of principal contradiction, and it highlights the principal contradiction is one that poses the most intense challenge to an individual or an organization and has the power to shape its future choices and the outcomes. The article highlights that China is contemporary India's principal strategic contradiction. Every other contradiction, be it Pakistan or internal contradictions, are very small when compared to that of China. It further says that Beijing seeks to dominate the region and is apprehensive of the American engagement with India and the India-US proximity. So it recommends that the best case for the China is to that India is being preoccupied with Pakistan, which will ensure that India is not focused on the growing threat from China, and providing Beijing with the opportunity to displace traditional Indian primacy in the South Asian region. Now this area is of considerable importance when we see the syllabus of GS2, as it particularly mentions about India and its neighborhood relation. And UPSC in the previous year also asked questions, issues related to that of China, that is with related to South China Sea, about the CPEC corridor between China and Pakistan, and also again about the South China Sea and the issues which involves freedom of navigation and bilateral issues between India and that of China. Through this article, we will try to understand what basically is the problem between India and China and what are the various issues that is concerning the two sides. We will first try to understand the problem between India and China through a larger perspective and then go into the deeper perspective or the deeper issues ranging from economic, water sharing, the issues related to NSG membership, UNSC membership, and that are issues emerging in the Indo-Pacific region. Starting our discussion with the broader problems, if we analyze the Indian and the Chinese relationship, we can conclude that Indian and Chinese relationship are a problem due to 4 P's. And these 4 P's are nothing but perception, power asymmetry, partnerships, and the perimeters. Perception hereby is that there is a trust deficit between India and China which is present ever since the 1962 war, when China misinterpreted India's overaction, and again in 2020 when India was constructing infrastructure project on the Indian side and which ultimately led to the culmination of Galwan clash. The second is the growing power asymmetry between India and China. India is in quest to maintain its political boundaries and to ensure strategic autonomy decision making in the region and to emerge as a regional power of South Asia, which does not align well with the Chinese position of strength, as the China not only has increased its economic power in the recent time but also has increased the military power, which India has to catch up upon. The third issue or the third P of the problem is that of partnership. Now, China is aggressively trying to increase its economic and political clout around the world through projects like Belt and Road Initiative and alliance with countries like Pakistan via the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is problematic for India, as India has hostile relations with Pakistan and at the same time also trying to ally with countries like or the erstwhile superpower like Russia, who have been traditional ally of India not only for defense equipments but also for holding up India's interests at the global level, that is the United Nations. The last P of problem between India and China is that of perimeters. There has been always a dispute regarding the borderline between India and that of China in the western and the eastern sector, particularly regarding the conflicting claims arising from basically Chinese five-finger policy, where it considers Ladakh, Nepal, Sikkim, Bhutan and Arunachal Pradesh to be the part of Chinese territory, and thus it directly challenges the India's territorial sovereignty. Now, if we can understand the evolution of problem, we have seen that the problem started right from the very beginning in 1962 with the misperceptions of each other action. And in the recent time, it has particularly improved post 2008 financial crisis. It was in the post 2008 financial crisis that China emerged as a strategic competitor to United States of America for the first time. And China in its competition with the United States of America and to increase its political and economic clout did not kept in mind the concerns of India, and as a counter to which Indian foreign policy towards China also changed. The next phase of discontent arose with the 2014 elections and the change of leadership in India. The policies of India that were launched after 2014, that is the neighborhood first policy, didn't go well with that of China. For example, India's engagement with Bhutan, Nepal went against the interest of China. Lastly and most recently, with the growing importance of the Indo-Pacific region, the China's concerns have also increased with the growing proximity between India and that's of United States of America, with China concern is nothing but a contentment policy that is launched by United States of America in the Indo-Pacific region in disguise. At the same time, India considers its partnership with USA necessary to maintain and to counter a militarily and territorially aggressive China and to maintain a rule-based order in Indian Ocean region, which is very important for India's economic security also. So with this, we have seen primarily the reasons of problem between India and China in brief. Now we'll try to understand the problem between India and China in detail. And the first problem that we'll discuss is that of water dispute between India and China. The first issue to mention here is that of water dispute between India and China, which began with the loss of Tibet, as most of the Himalayan rivers over the Tibetan plateau have their origin in this region. And this transnational nature of problem can only be solved with regional cooperation. We'll try to understand the various issues under the water dispute section. The first issue is that of water diversion, as China is in campaign to develop the western region and transfer of water from Tibetan mainland to Chinese mainland. Though the water of Brahmaputra and Satluj have not been diverted, there is a growing apprehension that tributaries of these rivers' waters can be transmitted. The second important issue is the construction of dam on Brahmaputra river. Now China has allowed construction of various small dams on the Brahmaputra river without even conducting proper environmental impact assessment, and there is a strong fear that this may impact the regional stability or the environment of this region. Further, there is also a concern regarding the issue of cracks in the artificial lake, for example, that of crack developed in 2002 over the Parichu lake, which led to devastating floods in Himachal Pradesh. Further, there is also concern regarding the water diplomacy of China in the South Asian region, as its engagement with Pakistan and engagement in Tibetan Plateau is continuously changing. China is deeply engaged in South Asia through water diplomacy and has signed agreements to build dams on river Indus in the Gilgit-Baltistan region, which India claims to be part of its own territory, thus undermining India's territorial sovereignty. Further, the Chinese dam building override a concern for India because there is no bilateral and multilateral treaties on water. China is becoming de facto party between India and Pakistan, which complicates the issue further, as China has been making heavy investment in the POK region, which is a bone of contention between India and Pakistan. China is also planning to build various reservoirs on rivers that is flowing from Tibetan Plateau, does not share data, that is the hydrographic data for the complete air, and these are the issues, as China has already completed Zangmu Dam on Brahmaputra and has proposed 3 more dams at Dagu, Zisha and Zikshu, which are presently under construction. And all these measures of China are seen as a point of concern in India. The next set of challenge that is between India and China is that of the Indo-Pacific region. Is primarily with regard to the South China Sea issue, as China is claiming the entire area of South China Sea up to the 9-dash line, and China proposes historical claims on 2 islands, that is Spratly and Paracel Island. Now this area is particularly important for the countries of the region, and various countries of this region, example Philippines, Vietnam, etc., are in continuous confrontation over the areas with China. Now this region is particularly important as 9-9 claim is blocking international water and international navigation area, which brings it under the control of China. Hence countries are opposing this. Maximum international trade of US through South China Sea happens, and impact of US and Japan over Indian Ocean and overall entire trade with Asia will be gone. Further, the South China Sea is also important as it holds huge hydrocarbon deposit. If the Chinese claims are not rule bound, or if China has the control over the South China Sea, India's economic and security influence in the Southeast Asia will also be impacted. For example, India's ONGC will lose its projects in Vietnam, Indonesia and Malaysia, and India's presence in the South China Sea will not be possible. Further, China can go on and expand its naval bases in the South China Sea region, and India's strategic edge over the Malacca Strait will be undermined. And ultimately, the India's aim to emerge as net security provider in this region will be undermined. This region is also a cause of contention between India and China, mainly because of growing importance and India's alignment with countries like that of grouping of Quad and active alliance with United States of America, which we have already discussed that China see as a containment policy of US in disguise, and which India is used as a counterweight to counter China in this region. The third major cause of concern between India and China is that of economic issues, primarily dealing with the trade deficit. Although the trade between India and China is rapidly climbing as an increase from 10 billion in 2014, but it is highly skewed in the favor of China. The trade imbalance between India and China has persistently been growing, and India's trade deficit has swelled to a level of $52 billion approximately. There is a concern in India for inability to export high value and high technology goods. India has only been exporting mainly raw material and primary goods to China, whereas India is importing high-end goods. Further, India also accuses of China of undertaking activities like that of dumping, providing inadequate market access to the pharmaceuticals of India and the advanced technology section. And there is also an issue of investment, tariffs and non-tariff barriers, and also sanitary and phytosanitary measures that are imposed by China on the trade from India. Another issue that is facing between India and China is that related to NPT and that of membership of NSG. As China has been trying hard to not let India become an NSG member, citing procedural complexities. And NSG issue has become the most bitter aspect in the India and Chinese relations in the recent time. It is also further blocking India's entry to the United Nations Security Council. India is also opposed to the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, the CPEC that is passing through the territories of POK and will be undermining India's sovereignty. The strengthening of India and US relations is not going well with China, as China is critical of India and US relationship. India supports the US and countries in reforming the freedom of navigation. And at last, there is also issue of Tibet and Dalai Lama. In fact, the Tibet spiritual leaders Dalai Lama still lives in India and is a tension area in India-China relationship. The visit that was made by Dalai Lama in Arunachal Pradesh had also been a matter of conflict between the two sides. So with this, we have seen the various issues ranging from boundary issues, hydrographic issues, or the water issues between the two countries, the economic issues between the two countries, the economic trade that is tilted in the favor of China, and the deficit which has been particularly increasing with regard to India. We have also seen the rise of Indo-Pacific region and the South China Sea, and a cause of concern for China, that is the growing cooperation between India and United States of America. Now we shall discuss what is the India's response while dealing with China. Now India has adopted two-pronged policy for dealing with China. The first prong involves continued engagement both bilaterally and on multilateral forums with China such as BRICS, SCO, etc. Now this is done to maintain the overall stability between the two countries and foster economic and diplomatic cooperation between the two. As a matter of second pronged strategy, India has sustained efforts to enhance its military and deterrent capability vis-a-vis China, and there is an emerging third prong in India-China's policy in the form of new external balance effort, which we seen as a formation of Quad, or India expanding its power by cooperation and establishing bases, for example the Changi Naval Base, and by concluding security agreements with countries like that of France and United States of America as a counterweight to Chinese growing economic and military might in the region. With this, we have seen what is the basic issue between India and China, where there is a problem of 4 P's that is present between India and China regarding perception, power asymmetry, partnership, and the perimeters. We have also understood the issues in detail with regard to the water problem, the economic issues, membership to NSG, UNSC, etc. And we have also seen the multi-pronged approach that India has adopted, where it is bilaterally engaging with China and also at the multilateral forum, but at the same time being realistic in its approach and developing military and deterrent capabilities vis-a-vis China.